Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Hard Truths Podcast. Today, my guest is Professor Simon Holland. He is a science filmmaker. We are going to talk about SETI, aliens, drones, and orbs. Get ready.
I'm ready.
Professor Simon, welcome to the show.
Ashton, it's really nice to be back, and I follow you with great interest. Thanks for having me on. There's a lot of things going on. What isn't in our sky right now? Whether it's orbs or drones or we're being attacked by bad actors, who knows? It's certainly a serious situation.
Well, that's what I want to talk to you about right off the bat. So,
Good.
if people have been living under a rock, there has been some kind of
Mm.
drone invasion on the East Coast in New Jersey for like the last month, and
Hmm.
everybody's wondering what it is. So, let me ask you, what do you think's going on? What have you seen?
Well, I live in Europe, and the drone invasion is here too, which is kind of interesting, folks. In fact, long before it was in New Jersey, it was over specific NATO Ministry of Defense RAF bases here in Eastern England, not here. I live in France, but that was deeply worrying because the bases had no idea how to react. They sent F-15s, which aren't exactly even the most modern plane, because that's what they had, to counter these unknown threats, which probably were drones. And I had a long chat with ex-MOD Nick Pope, who's well known, and we both came to the conclusion that it was probably Britain's worst uh, um, encounter with things coming into British airspace, since I don't know, since the Cold War, when
Well, why wouldn't
Russians.
they shoot these things down? Right? Like, is that why you assume that it must be us? It seems so weird that these things would be over our military bases, and I've heard this a lot.
Right.
What's your explanation for that?
I was. That would be my first reaction. I mean, literally, a shotgun, or even they've been using birds of prey can take down a drone. What Nick Pope said, and I think I agree with Nick on this very much, is they were the drones or whatever they are an unconventional threat, and the military tend to live in the past. So they countered a DJI hobby drone or something bigger, we don't know, with an effing 15. It's an inappropriate reaction. They needed denial of flight EMP devices, which they have, but supposedly they didn't have them on the perimeter of the bases that had this encounter. And they were fighting yesterday's war. And I think that is an enormous clue for the British airspace violation, and I'm quite mad about it because not only were these drones seen over NATO bases, they were also seen over British MOD bases. But really weirdly, and I think a big clue and nastily, they were seen over the married quarters of the RAF flight crew in a base that used to be an airport, which was now housing for their wives and children. And the same kind of drones were seen over there. And I really think there was a big message being sent. I think the timing was more than a coincidence that the United Kingdom had just allowed Storm Shadow cruise missiles into the Ukraine, which have the capability of going into Russia. Although this is not very well known, I happen to know this. The Storm Shadow cruise missiles were restricted in their use by the Ukrainians to only go into the Ukrainian national borders. But of course, that includes areas of the Ukraine that have been occupied. So it still could be seen by Russia as they are being flown into Russian controlled land territory. But the drone incursions in the UK, I think, were a sign um, to Britain to, we have unconventional weapons, you are vulnerable. And that's how I saw it. But then who is doing it, and
Yeah.
how is that pulled off? Because they certainly didn't fly nearly 3,000 miles, from Moscow to Lakenheath.
Mhm.
They were smallish drones in this case. I think the New Jersey ones, we'll discuss what they might be. But in the British case, they were definitely drones. People saw them. There's photographs of them. They're quadcopter, small-ish
Oh, so
drones.
they were quadcopter. I was going to ask about the morphology of what these things look.
No, the British ones were definitely. I mean, there were some, and we should go on to this about a slightly um, uh, not very informed opinion that people who didn't know what they were, with kind of slightly out of focus, fuzzy camera phones filming single point light sources in the sky and
Yeah.
not understanding. But there's definite footage in the British case. They are not particularly big. They were quadcopter drones. Now, viewers out there, you're all shouting, "Yeah, but there was weird stuff." Well, there might have been weird stuff, but I think in the British case, not necessarily in the American case, but in the British case, they seem to be quite off the shelf droney things. And one of the things again that Nick Pope and I discussed, we're old enough to remember there used to be a phrase, "useful idiots," and that in the Cold War, people who align themselves, say, with Marxism Today, which was a newspaper and an organization in Britain, or CND, Civil Nuclear Defense, or specific nationalists, say from Scotland, my home country, would often hand over what they thought was not secrets. They would hand over information like the movements of US submarines at Holy Loch to Marxism Today or CND headquarters. But in fact, sadly, they were compromised and getting funded by Russia, and they were, in fact, handing over useful material to Moscow. And Moscow gave them in Russian, excuse my lack of Russian, they called them in Russian useful idiots.
Yeah.
And it's quite possible that the same idea of using people for cash, go and fly your drone at Lakenheath, I'll give you £1,000, or coercion, a Eastern European immigrant into the UK, we know who your mum is, kind of thing, go and fly a drone over Lakenheath, was a much better explanation than them flying all over Germany and the North Sea and ending up in Eastern England, which wouldn't be practical.
So you think that the European drone incursion is political in nature
Yeah,
then, right? And
I think the timing was very, very evidence of that. It was following the Storm Shadow announcement by British MOD, and I think also the drone idea, the concept of drones as unconventional warfare, was a kind of, as I said, my film, it was putting the willy up Britain because, I think that it was unconventional and that whoever did it, whoever it might be, I can't actually say, but whoever did it, and it was probably humans, were sending a message. I mean, the drones were only there at night. I mean, ET would be there during the day. I mean, it's only at night. They were illuminated. Some of them, somebody I know who's called Angry Astronaut went out there. He drove up. He's American, but was living in London, and he drove up to Lakenheath, and he saw one go over his head, and he said it was almost had a small LED hanging underneath it. Now, the reason they wanted it to be seen was because it was sending a message. These are definitely trying to get the point across that they're flying around perimeter fences to make a point. And
have
I
you?
think
Okay.
I think it's related to the American things, but I think there's something more going on in the United States which we should discuss.
And you mentioned the use of drone warfare, which I think Elon Musk
Mm.
mentioned recently, and it terrifies me, especially if you include AI onto it. Have you seen the videos out of the Ukraine where they're like suicide drones flying into people and blowing them up
Yeah,
and things like that? That's alarming to me. And it makes me
yeah.
wonder, I don't know about that particular incident, but at least with the one going on in the United States right now, like how can you leave these up? Like these things could have bombs on them, warheads on them that could fly into people and blow them up. I mean, that
Well, it
would
was the
be
message. Yeah,
yeah, it would be
I mean, What they did in Britain was just fly around the damn perimeter fence, and the reaction was send up the F-15. Well, that's rubbish. I mean, an F-15's minimum airspeed, as you would know, is like maybe 100 knots, and and the drone's like 20 feet above the ground, going at 10 miles an hour
Yeah,
over the
yeah.
fence, woo, with a bomb. And no, I did a film,
Mm.
and I just did like you. I researched some Ukrainian drone footage, and I had to be really careful, to choose what I actually could show because no, they're Ukraine are very successful, and Russia are also using them in the Ukrainian conflict very successfully. I mean, you can literally with a 3D printer
Mm.
make your own drone and drop something nasty onto your enemy, and that could
Absolutely.
happen.
So, what do you think's going on in the United States version? What have you seen? Have you seen anything that's compelling to you from a video perspective? For me, just throwing it out
No,
there, most of what I've seen looks like airplanes or just
yeah,
other misidentified objects. I've only seen a couple videos that
yeah.
seem to show some magnification of something that maybe might have some kind of field, electromagnetic field around it, but it could also just be a blurry, like a out of focus star. So,
Yeah.
what is your thoughts?
Um, I definitely agree, Ashton. I think that I haven't seen any definite evidence. Somebody pointed me very pointedly, today to look at a certified pilot's sighting in Oregon with their air traffic control interaction, where he saw a red light, and other pilots saw this as well in the sky. I think probably quite near Portland, but I'm not sure. And then he shot some cockpit footage, and I'm sorry to say, it was an out of focus orb, and it wasn't an orb; it was just something out of focus. So I couldn't say exactly what it is. But here's, I don't think, I think we're missing the point. I think what the drones represent in the United States is something much more important.
Really?
What the drones are, I think that is not the important thing. The important thing is that these drones are unknown, and nobody in the American government are reacting to it very sensibly. And the public reaction to that is fear. And I think it's actually, it is an attack, but I think it's psychological warfare to an extent. It doesn't matter what these objects are. Some will be quadcopters being tested, which is
Interesting
currently.
view.
Some will be copycat home DJI drones. Some might be unknown, but I doubt it somehow. And a lot will be just a lot of drone sightings. Somebody said to me, somebody sees a drone over there, and then somebody sees the same drone and films it from over there. Suddenly you've got two drones. Well, you haven't necessarily. They were, you've got a perspective on the same light in the sky. But we're under attack, or the United States is currently, and Britain as well,
Mhm.
is currently under attack. This is psychological. This is having a very, very strong effect. People are frightened, people are worried, people are concerned why their government, specifically, well, in Britain as well, but very much in the United States, on the FBI go on TV and go, I don't know what it is. Well, that's a pathetic answer. Um, we have this problem, and you live in the very state which is the key to the answer. You had the wonderful FBI officer who called in, I know somebody in Minnesota who's doing flight training and doesn't want to land. And it was ignored, it wasn't passed on.
Mhm.
And we all know where that went. And I think I'm seeing, as a non American, I'm seeing a disconnect between agencies. Where is Homeland Security that was set up post 9/11 to actually cut the crap and actually go to the FAA? Look at New York TRACON. They have radar that could track these damn things from takeoff to landing. Go to all the agencies that you've got and come to some conclusion. But by going on CNN and TV and all the news stations and having clips saying, I've no idea, we don't think it's anything we could worry about, is just causing mass panic. And I think whoever's doing it, if it is organized, is going, it's working, chaps.
Yeah, I don't believe for a second that they don't know exactly what these things are. Now, I do know
No.
the government is inefficient and that these organizations may not
Mm,
communicate to one another. I don't really think that the FBI or Homeland Security by themselves would have any inside information. They would need like satellite footage or some of the
right.
other
Which they
advanced.
could have. Right.
Yeah, and that's the thing is and it seems like, so I would be looking at the NRO, the NSA, the NGA, these people that they know what's going on. The
Of
question then
course.
is, why are they not relaying that information to the local authorities so that the information can be disseminated to the public? And to your point, it does seem kind of like a psychological operation where, people are freaking out. There's mass hysteria going on right now in the United States. I would even go so far as to say it's mass formation psychosis once again, where people now have this idea in their head that
Yeah, I
there are
do.
these things flying around in the sky. And like you said, that was a great point. That maybe it doesn't even matter what they are, is
Yeah.
that there's
Yeah.
something up there. And now every single person's going out there at night and they're filming stuff and
I
they're seeing
know.
a lot of normal stuff and they're misattributing it. And we get this
Mm,
cycle where it just gets crazier and crazier. And now you've got major influencers that never talk about the UFO topic and what have you
right.
all in on it. So do you think
Oh, you
I
nailed
know
it. You absolutely nailed it. I mean, that's exactly how, as an outsider, not living in the US as I'm seeing it, the effect of whatever the F these are is tremendous. It actually is an attack.
Hmm.
Is it internal? Is it external? Is it just hysterical reaction? But it's definitely causing a lot of chaos, and it needs to be sorted out pretty damn
Do you
quick.
Do you think it could be related to the recent United States election with Donald Trump switching over? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Or
Um, sure. It seems like a possibility. I mean, if you were going to cause real disruption before the Democratic takeover
Mhm.
by Donald Trump, because he was elected, you could easily cause an awful lot of disarray to an incumbent, person who's about to take the office by having a hell of a flap in your country, which you could then, fix by methods which might be quite draconian. And yeah, no, I mean, I think, I mean, if I had to put money on it, I think that's actually more likely than it's the Ruskies or the Chinese or
Yeah.
the Iranian mothership. I think they're all quite hysterical, but that's part of the hysteria. And the other thing I'd like to say, I mean, this is very controversial, viewers, is I think we're actually seeing us, the so-called UFO community, if that's what we are, I don't know, being slightly used in this, because I don't think we or our community of people who are invested or interested in the abnormal, paranormal, are reacting very well. I think we are actually being a bit hysterical, and I think that's part of it. Maybe this is a plot, non-critical thinkers who want to believe one thing or another, who are very set in their ways, uh, manipulate the buggers. Excuse my
Yeah,
French.
this is where I would throw some criticism and shade on the UFO community, where buying into
Yeah,
the mass hysteria here is how you get yourself discredited as well. Because I think everybody's
sure.
really desperate for alien disclosure, UFO disclosure in general.
Right,
And
right.
if it turns out to be a mockery, then this is why people don't take you serious, especially if you're just filming like airplanes in the sky and saying that, oh, the UFOs are morphing into airplanes because, like that kind of stuff. People
Yeah, I
listen
mean,
to
my
that and sounds kind of
iPad is
wild.
just full of that. I mean, it's just message after message. They're copying us. They're,
Yeah.
Jack Sarfati's telling me they're time travelers. They're metamaterials of, Uri Geller's telling me all this stuff. You're probably reading the same emails, Ashton. And, and I'm going, stop now, stop. I mean, let's be slightly more objective about this. And at the same time, we've got this hysteria going on. We've got a lot of frightened people, and we've got a government that's doing F all. I mean, get it together, people, unless it's intentional.
Do you
You
think
know,
so? We were we're tap dancing around
we
the
are.
main thing, which is, do you think this is Project Bluebeam, which is the fake alien invasion or whatever? Like, because now I'm starting to wonder. This thing's been going on for so long, and it's so disruptive. To all the points that you made in the last 15 minutes, it's like This seems like it's just to freak people out. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what they are.
Yeah.
And the only explanation I can come up with who's responsible is my own government, something related to America. Because if it was anything else, we'd be knocking it out of the sky. It'd be too dangerous. So I sit there and I think, man, maybe this is a Project Bluebeam, but they just can't even pull it off. Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I have a very. Did you know about me, Donald Trump, and Project Bluebeam story? Oh God.
Now's the time.
I know.
Oh,
Ashton
no, I don't know. Tell us the story.
Okay, so when I was seriously misquoted about imminent alien contact, um, it was seen by a lobby group, part of, no doubt, the Donald Trump organization, that I, as a European, non-American, non-voting person, was possibly invoking an alien were coming as this whatever it's called, blue something. Yeah, it was completely rubbish. And
Guys,
so
he's pretending like he doesn't know what Bluebeam is. Everybody, Professor Simon's the one who's pushing the Project Bluebeam. I'm just
yeah, blue. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's sorry. I don't even know
No,
what
I
it's
get
called
you.
because it is completely rubbish. But it didn't come from. I mean, somebody spread that as a rumor, and I got an awful lot of comments saying, that I was pro Kamala. I don't even know who she is. I'm British. I live in France, and I was dissing Donald because I was evoking the. The story went when somebody explained it to me. I asked a friend in America who agreed that I was being dissed by people in that camp, and they were saying, "Oh yeah, it's the old Werner von Braun deathbed message where." Alien invasion will be used as a political influence just before a large political event. And I was going, it's me. Oh, crap. It was like, it wasn't actually me, but I mean, no, I was, and then I read it in newspapers and things. So it's like, but is this one really, are the drones really blue beam? I don't know, but yeah. Uh, uh, Ashton, would knowledge of we're not alone in the universe or definite confirmation of highly strange UAP or ET presence actually have that effect? I mean, would it actually work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Simon. I don't think that it would anymore. I know
don't
it
think
would work
so.
on me. I personally don't care about aliens. I think alien could come knock on my door and, it wouldn't matter. I would still be going to work tomorrow. Just be like, hey, whatever. I assume there's
Sure,
life out there somewhere. It's a big universe. So I've never thought we're just
definitely.
alone in the universe. But,
Well,
and I
no.
think that a lot of people too now have just become so disaffected with everything going on, where it's like you see the meme out there where it's like, hi, I'm an alien. It's like, aren't you freaked out? And they're like, nah, I got a lot of stuff going on right now. It's like, and this is where I think the UFO community is kind of fallen behind, where it's like in the
Yeah.
90s with the X
Yeah.
Files and everything, aliens were this big revelation where we were opening our minds to not being alone in the universe. But
Right.
now I feel like it's not even that big a thing. It's kind of like a speed bump. And so that's why I
Right.
look at this and I go, maybe this is Project Bluebeam. And maybe it was like it was just we've outgrown that, and it's not going to have the same psychological impact anymore. But let me ask you
Yeah.
about the SETI thing because you brought that up. I was following that. You were making a lot of waves. You were in a lot of newspaper articles
Everywhere.
talking about that. So, what is the background story for
Oh, good. I get
how
to
you
tell
got
you.
made aware of that? Because we spoke, I think, right before, a few months before that went down, and we were talking about faster light communication, things like that. And I saw that. I was like, oh, wow, Professor Simon's like going viral now because they
Yeah.
are saying that you're like this expert. And they always kind of like,
Oh, I know. I got
sensationalize
called
it.
all kind of things. Yeah. Yeah.
So, what
ET,
was the
NASA, filmmaker. Yeah, that's
so
great.
set the record straight? Yeah, NASA filmmaker. I remember seeing that. Set the record straight for us on that. Like, what kind of
Right.
information came to you? How credible did you deem it?
I still
And
do.
yeah,
Oh
so
no,
go
no.
ahead.
There's way. Thank you. Yeah. Hi everybody. Let's set the record straight. I like that. That's great. No, everything that I said was actually true. And I think it's very interesting, the reaction against it. And I think that's the story that people didn't understand. So many people today are saying, you said they would be here next week and it's been a month and they're still not. I was going, no, that's the real story. So just give my spiel of how this whole thing came about. So Drake and Sagan set up SETI, and they decided that they didn't have enough money and telescope time to listen to the entire radio spectrum of the visible universe, the listenable universe. So they just thought that when you turn on a radio telescope, which I've done many times, you hear hydrogen buzz. It's a big buzz which you then filter out to listen to the quiet things that you're trying to find in the universe. So Drake and Sagan said, as we can't listen to everything, we assume that aliens will communicate and say hello on the hydrogen wave band because they would know that we could hear it. It was a terrible waste of time. From 1960s right up into the 90s, the only money that they had, because SETI is a self-funded organization with no government money, was to listen in the hydrogen band for aliens going hello. And they never heard anybody. They never heard a thing. Odd signals were found, like the wow signal, outside of the hydrogen band. But by the 1990s, the technology to record on a database, on a hard drive, a wider bandwidth than just the hydrogen band got around. And they had some bit more money, and they used Green Bank radio telescope, and they recorded wideband, everything, not only the hydrogen teeny band, but everything. But then SETI didn't have any way of processing the signal. They wrote an algorithm that could filter to see if there was a narrowband signal, if it was a single point source, and if it was coming from an exoplanet. And those three things they put into a piece of software called SETI at Home. And you and I and millions of people downloaded it as a screensaver. And what they did is send a little chunk of this wide signal, which they couldn't process effectively, to everybody at home. And you filtered it through and to see if there was a candidate. And that word candidate I'll mention a couple of times. It was so popular. I know people who worked for people like Texaco, literally, I do, who was the IT person, and it was up to him to put a screensaver on 1,000 million PCs all around the world, and he chose to SETI at Home. And SETI at Home became a victim of its own success, and they didn't want to let people down, so they rescanned the sky. That's really important. It's not the same scan sent multiple times. They actually rescanned the sky and sent it out to lots more people. And the software was open source. And a few candidates were found, but not very many. But a very smart, this is how I heard the story, a very smart statistician and mathematician in a large central Italian university, I don't want to say his name, parsed the open source SETI at Home information and found 5 candidates that were narrowband, coming from an exoplanet, and had all the characteristics of single point source, right? I mean, they were candidates, so they were called C for candidates. Along came Yuri Milner and set up an organization called Breakthrough Listen with lots of money, and they bought as much telescope time at Green Bank in the Northern Hemisphere and places like Parkes in the Southern Hemisphere in Australia, and they immediately went to the 5 candidates and called them BLC, Breakthrough Listen Candidate 1 to 5. And BLC1 was the first one they looked at because it's the closest to Earth. It's in the Alpha Centauri system. It's a planet orbiting a star which is 4.8 light years away. And it's really important that it's 4.8 light years because it's possible to find a technological signature that's 100,000 light years away, but that means at the speed of light, the information you're getting is 100,000 years old. And imagine how we've evolved over that time. So one that's 4.8 years old is relevant and and very interesting. So they did that one first. Also at the time, back in the early 2000s, they had single telescopes. Green Bank is great, Parkes is great, and they're trackable dishes, steerable dishes. But today we've moved on, and that's part of my story, to much bigger networked arrays. But they looked at BLC1, Breakthrough Listen Candidate 1, from the SETI information, and they found it was a single point source, and they found that it was a very narrow band of electromagnetic frequency. And unfortunately, it was also very low level, LIS, low information zone. So they published a paper saying we can't confirm that that it is a technological signature. I also have to say what that is. So we're not looking anymore for aliens going, hello. We're looking for the buzz of an alien civilization that might be using electromagnetic frequency to do everyday things, if they are. And it's a good place to look. They're also looking for lasers. They're also looking for structures even. And they're very, very much, and have found, and this is very important to know, biological signatures by looking through the atmosphere of a planet, exoplanet that is transiting its star, and you can now look in the narrow slit of its atmosphere and analyze it, and biosignatures have been found now over a year ago by a group doing a spectral analysis of an exoplanet's atmosphere. Not the same one as BLC1, but another proof that there's some kind of non-human life forms out there. I mean, that's all we really need.
Yeah.
But BLC1, they published saying we can't confirm it. And that's what everybody quotes back at me, saying it was interference. But hang on, let me explain something.
Sure.
So you've got let me make a
So just to clarify real quick, so you're saying that your information is coming from related to BLC1, or is it separate from BLC1?
No, it was very much about BLC1 from my source, who said that BLC1 is a genuine signal.
And that was detected in 2019, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And well, the signal existed beforehand. It was a candidate from SETI.
Yeah. Okay.
Breakthrough Listen, I spoke to Andrew Simeon, Dr. Andrew Simeon, who's the principal investigator of Breakthrough Listen. So he told me this, that BLC1 is still a candidate. And but the unlikeliness of it being human interference is this. There's the telescope, and there's the exoplanet. And it's, if you turn the telescope away, the signal goes. If you point it at my finger, it's there. If you turn it away, it goes. So it's coming from a single point source, and it's narrow. Well, what they're saying is there is something man-made between the telescope and the exoplanet that's in lockstep with the exoplanet, and it's transmitting a very strange, non-obvious electromagnetic spectrum. Okay. So what's between Earth, Parkes, and Alpha Centauri? There isn't anything. I mean, so saying it's a human signal, you could immediately say, oh, it's a Russian Cosmos satellite. Well, there isn't one. And it tracks in the same way. It's following the exoplanet. And that was the end of their report. But what happened next is the clincher. What they found with the signal is that the signal is Doppler shifted. That means they managed to track with Parkes for as long as the exoplanet, no, that's not it, my finger's the exoplanet. As long as the exoplanet orbited, they followed it, and then it went, and then they were in Australia, and it went around the Earth, and then they picked it up again. And in that time that they could track it, they found that the electromagnetic spectrum from this single point source was either if it was light, blue, or red shifted, or Doppler shifted up or down, as you can know. And the Doppler shift of the signal is the same speed as the rotation of the planet. So if it isn't coming from that planet, it's coming from something in space that's lined up with Australia, that's using very strange frequencies that humans don't normally use, and it's rotating at the same speed as the planet. I mean, the question I, as an investigator, immediately said when people said rubbish to me was, why are they lying? I mean, what is it that why are they wanting not to say that they found a very good signal? Because by saying that it could be human interference but not having any source, they're covering something up. And so I went back to my contact who told me about this story originally and said, why are they lying? And he said, oh, you need to know who Peter Schenkel is. I'd never heard of that name. He is an advisor to SETI, and he told SETI, whose mission statement is tell the world, not to tell the world. He advised them that if SETI or Breakthrough Listener, who are probably going along with the same protocol, find a weak, unconfirmed, but very good candidate, they did, don't say anything. Because immediately, and I proved this, my viewers proved this, immediately you say, I think we found a technological signature. Yeah. Everybody says, what do they look like? What are they saying? Well, okay, stop. We found a buzz coming. It might be rocks rubbing together, but we found a buzz of a technological signature. Are they blue is a stupid question, but that's what Schenkel told SETI. If you are at least 3 steps ahead of the general public, what will happen is that SETI will be thrown out with the bathwater, and they'll get Gypsy Rose Lee to answer the stupid questions, and the science will be blown away. So if you find a signal, shut up. You can start telling governments, and they have told governments, and they've told the Vatican, and the British government, I read a report that they've published, have got now an advisory of how they would exploit, which is very typical British, the confirmation of ET, and their exploitation was building better telescopes. And that's the real story. The signal is real, but somebody doesn't want it to be published. And then since BLC1 and Parks, Europe and EU Horizon Fund, which is the largest science fund on the planet, a bit like National Science Foundation, but even bigger, have done this networked idea. We can now network the square kilometer array, a big radio telescope in South Africa, and all the LOFAR and Jodrell Bank telescopes, which are already networked in Europe, to make an ear the size of our planet. And since then, an organization called Ashton, who also are keeping quite quiet, are finding evidence of technological signatures. We have the tools in 2024 to prove that we're not alone in the universe. We have the biological signature, and we have very good confirmation. Personally, as a pundit, I think the public should know this, but now I understand why it was immediately blocked, and nobody would. I was very alone. I was very friendly with people like Jill Tarter, who used to be the head of SETI. I worked with Jill, and she wouldn't return my phone call. And the press person from SETI, and I'm sure I'm not on the Breakthrough Listen Christmas card list anymore.
Well, so let me jump in here because I have a lot of questions. You gave us a lot of really good information. For the viewers,
okay. No, I asked details. Go on.
Yeah, because for me, I think the biggest thing was, and this isn't something I didn't realize because it's getting misreported in the news, is that we've got some, we received some message from the aliens. Like that's basically how it's being reported. But the way you just described it is, no, we're seeing something that appears to be a techno signature, a buzz. A buzz that we're seeing out there. That's a big difference, but it's also very important. And then, like you said, everybody just wants answers out there. To me, this is very similar to the detection of seasonal methane on Mars, where we detected seasonal methane on Mars, which is a biosignature. It doesn't mean that there's little green men on Mars, but it could mean there's bacteria, which would be huge, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't get reported on it just because, I don't know, people just don't want to accept it, or I think the standard of evidence for proof is like so high, as opposed to like, hey, here's this pretty incredible information and this data point that would indicate there might be something more going on there. And I
Mm.
think James Webb right now as well is actually, like you said, scanning on what is it on for the various chemicals that we see when the
Yeah,
planets go in front of the stars, and you can actually get a spectrum analysis
they've
of
done
what we're
it.
seeing
Yeah.
there. And if you see organics or things that are consistent, like methane's one of those things, that might indicate there's stuff there. So the big thing though that you said is that this is coming from Alpha Centauri, or one of our closest stars that we
Mm.
have.
Mm.
And if we find some type of technosignature that close, that would
I know.
indicate life's got to be everywhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just BLC1 was the closest because it was a better signal and it was also not very old. But yeah, right. Life is going to be everywhere, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be uh, people in flying saucers. I mean,
Yeah.
look at our planet. I live at a
Yeah.
farm. I've just got out 5 minutes ago and fed my goats. I mean, they are a life form. They're an intelligent species, but they don't drive Teslas. I don't hope not. And they hang on. No, no, no. they, no, but I aliens are going to be in the Jacques Vallée phrase, highly strange. I mean, they're not, or in the Star Trek phrase, it's life, Jim, but not as we know it. I mean, I I think it's amazing. I think the technological signature is really interesting because it implies that um, that they are using electromagnetic frequencies, which is a bit odd, really, because we as a planet are moving away from EM. I
Yeah.
mean, it's EM if you start off with kind of radio, radio and Marconi. We're now mainly fiber optic, and we're not actually transmitting signals through the ether or whatever, anymore. So it might be a bubble of a technological race who uses electromagnetic spectrum. Although we still kind of like to use it for things like
Yeah.
radar and satellite communication makes sense. Um,
Well, so
the
that's
other
something that.
thing that Breakthrough Listen said to me, I'm sorry to interrupt, it's just a really great fact. He said that um, there's James Webb can find spectral technological signatures. I said, I don't understand. He said, not only can you find methane or evidence of respiratory and life and other chemicals which are normally associated with creatures, you might find fluorocarbons. You might find a chemical in their atmosphere which isn't a natural molecule. It's something that had to be constructed, and that would
Hmm.
be a technological spectral signature. Sorry, that was.
Wow.
Mm.
Yeah, and so the alien thing is really interesting because I was like you a couple of years ago, where I thought they're going to be way different than us, and I still think that aliens would be way different. That we can't really even. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily just going to be like humanoids. But then I think there's also the other side of the spectrum, which what if they are exactly like us? Like, what if we are the aliens and
We
somebody
are the.
dropped us off here and we've forgotten our history or something too? Like, honestly, both options seem plausible to me. But the point you brought up, what I really want to dig into
I
is
agree.
the method of communication, which is
Okay.
like the
Mm.
EM thing. Like that was a great point you bring up. Is like, isn't it kind of weird that we would detect an electromagnetic signature if we're moving away from that? And this is the part where I think human hubris comes into play, where we think, oh, we've advanced everything there is. I remember watching a show like over a decade ago where they were going through SETI and these signatures, and we hadn't had a lot of luck in finding stuff. And somebody comes and points out, well, what if we're not looking for the right thing? We're not looking at the right bandwidth, or we're not looking for the right message. That these
Right.
aliens or whatever they are using a different method of communication. And the thing that I've researched in the last year that has really blown me away is gravity waves. You were mentioning the thing about the ether before, which, if people Google Hal Puthoff's patent, you're going to find out he's got something called communication system. And in it
Yeah,
is
I
a
know.
communication method with no electromagnetic signature. Hmm.
Mm.
And instead, it uses force free. Correct me if I'm wrong here, or people can
Yeah.
fact check me, but it's like force-free communication, beaming it basically through the ether.
Right.
And to me, that is it's a scalar communication system, or I would
Yeah.
call it a gravity communication system. I think that in order to not ruffle people's feathers, they call it like a quantum communication system.
Oh, the badly misused word. Yeah, I agree.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's how they get the people
Yeah.
to not like say, "Oh, this is pseudoscience," basically. But what do
Yeah.
you think about that idea? And could something like that? Because Robert M.L. Baker was a Lockheed Martin engineer, and he
Right.
wrote over a dozen papers on high frequency gravitational waves and using them for communication as one of the methods that they could be used for. And I think, oh,
I
well,
like
doesn't
it.
that make way more sense? Is that they're using something that we are not using right now conventionally, that we aren't even looking for out there. And that if we have a high frequency gravitational wave detector, maybe we start seeing these things
We do.
everywhere out in the universe. And I'm curious your thoughts on that. And then the other thing I'm curious on is, do you think that something like that could actually communicate faster than the speed of light?
Yeah, it does. Oh, that's a big statement. Yeah. 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 Um, that's I hadn't considered gravity waves, but very interestingly, Ashton, that a number of new LIGO um, instruments have been built. Certainly, gravity waves are being looked at and investigated by all over the world right now. The sensitivity of the original system has been incredibly increased. I was thinking of doing a film about it, so I was researching it. But there's now gravity wave detectors all over the world, certainly in China and in Europe, as well as the one out in probably Oregon, I think it is, the original one. I think it's near Hartford. And but Hal Puthoff's onto something as well. He's an interesting person to follow. Um, but I got told about this guy called Gunter Nimitz. Right, so Gunter is a now in his late 80s, 90s. He isn't available on social media. He is a retired, very senior physicist at Cologne University, and he experimented in the early 2000s with what he called quantum tunnel communication. And what he discovered with an experiment which is reproducible in your bedroom, and he did it with undergraduate students in a laboratory, is he can send a microwave source, but interestingly, it doesn't have to be microwaves. It can be it could be light, but anything you can send. But in his case, it was microwave through a device, and then have an air gap of a few meters to a receiver. And what he discovered is that he knows the time the signal would take from the source to the receiver, and of course it would transit that time, and there would be a distinct speed of light communication. But he found that by putting it into this tunnel transmitter, that when it exited the tunnel transmitter, it entered the tunnel receiver instantaneously. The gap between the transmitter and the receiver was non-existent. And as he moved them further apart, the signal, I mean, there was a slight delay of it going in and a slight delay of it coming out, but the bit in between, which could be a meter or could be 100 million light years, that's his point, was instantaneous. When the signal transited space, it was like, somebody told me this, the person who told me this, it's like you're pushing on a rod. You push this end and the other end is moving. There is a direct connection. It isn't a wave, it's not an energy with a time base. It is just a connection. And that connection makes a lot of sense. Oh, I'm going to have to use the word quantum. In the quantum world or the subatomic world, where we have a world which is not like the far field world that we live in, but we have a world where we know that everything is connected. So is it connected in a way where you can put a signal in and receive it out?
Hmm.
without a delay. And he demonstrates this. He immediately gave that idea to a group that I'm associated with or know of in Europe as a receiver on radio telescopes. He said, put one on the radio telescope. Sorry, he's not Scottish, but put one on the radio telescope and see if the aliens are using my form of instant communication, because they'd be really smart if they did. And so, strapped on the side of a whole bunch, and I know where they are, and I'm not saying radio telescopes, just a part of a network in Europe, are Gunter Nimitz's receivers. And
Really?
yeah,
You know that for a fact?
yeah, you can read the funding for it. I mean,
Wow.
and there was a conference in Cologne where the radio telescope administrators from EU went to see the demonstration. They were very skeptical. The head of SETI from the US was there, and he had a conniption, supposedly. He absolutely hated it and stormed out and is dissing what Gunter Nimitz is doing. But some people there, he's a very famous person. John Michael Goodyear had him on, and he's really full of himself. But one of the people there, I can't remember his name, one of the people there at the meeting is my contact. And he said, we're interested. Can you make one? And we'll strap it nicely on one of our European telescopes. And what have they heard? They're not saying.
So, do you have reason to believe that something has any type of communication? There's been some success with that.
I I have no reason to believe that. No,
Okay.
all I know is that it's another tool
Yeah.
which they are using. Obviously,
Mm.
my contact, who's very excited and was part of the project to retrofitting these telescopes with this device, said if we ever did find a signal, and I'm I'm not at liberty to say anything more, um, it would then open the opportunity to speak back. But then we talked over the phone a long time about the difficulty of communication. I mean, how do you communicate with somebody who has no references to you? So the
Mhm.
actual technological way of communicating might be crackable, but then how do you take it to the next level? If we ever if we ever heard a signal that was using this, but it would make so much sense that an advanced race, and maybe we humans are slowly getting into that level,
Yeah.
would
To that
use
point,
it. Hmm.
let me ask a couple quick questions real quick, if you don't mind. Because first of all, what you just said right there is huge. Is that how do we even communicate? It's like, okay, it's one thing to say that we get
Right,
a
right.
signature, but like, it's not like they're speaking English to us. Like, are we going to speak in Morse code or, so this
No,
is almost
no,
like the movie Contact. It's like, what are they going to send us, like prime numbers, or what are they going to do
no,
here?
no, yeah, prime numbers, but even that would be impossible. I mean, I think the movie Arrival was better at that. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I think we don't have the ability to talk to squids. So, and we eat them, unfortunately. But I mean, they're very highly evolved and very highly intelligent, have been on this planet, our Earth, for longer than humans. And we can't bloody talk to them. How pathetic is that? So how are we going to talk to the aliens? And, and as you say, do they talk? Is there a concept of color? I mean, we are so human in the way
Yeah.
that our tiny spectrum that our eyes see and our ears can hear and our feeling and touch and our gravity. We're people of Earth, so we can't even assume that they would know what a ball is. If you speak to a child in a different language,
Yeah.
you could show them a ball and they would immediately know it was round and they could bounce it or play with it, even if they didn't know the language to talk to you in, from a foreign country. But an alien might not even know what a round thing is. It would be incredibly challenging and fantastic.
Yeah,
I
the
can't.
part that really also is like people don't realize is why would we think aliens would have the same concept of time that we do as well? They might even have the same concept as time. Like it's like the movie Lord of the Rings with the Ents, the tree people or whatever, that like their concept of time is different, moves much slower than our concept of time. Can you imagine how difficult it would be to communicate with a species where our concepts of time are different? Or like in the movie Arrival, where they like somehow kind of see the future and the past all together. Yeah, exactly. Like a
As a
circle.
circle. I know.
This is where like I think the UFO community specifically really needs to update some of their narratives, because a lot of it's like, oh, all the aliens are
Yeah.
telepathic. It's like, okay, well, I mean, maybe, but I think the bigger issue is like,
Yeah.
do they even have the same concepts of
Anything.
morality, consciousness,
No.
time, these
No.
things, right? Like those are huge differences that could make it very difficult to have any type of formal communication, right?
Totally agree. I couldn't. I mean, yeah, I've done films about what I call time base, and
Mm-hmm.
all you have to do is f with a time base, and suddenly we've had this in science fiction, fiction, where something is moving so fast that you don't see it because we can't scan it, and it appears like a buzz. It was episodes of Star Trek and things like where the thing
Yeah.
was moving so fast they couldn't see it until they got into their time base, or things that move so incredibly slowly that we think it's a rock. But in
Yeah.
fact, the rock is moving, but it moves over 10,000 years. So yeah, no, you're right. And then in the subatomic world, the concept of time is very different. Um,
Yeah.
uh, One of the things that have been fascinating me in a film that I just published today is about remote viewing and
Mm.
how by tapping into probably how our brain has a quantum aspect to how it works. We are fundamentally quantum inside our atoms, but we're far field, beings. But we have a connection to a spiritual connection to a timeless connected universe. We call it God, we call it religion. But one of the explanations of remote viewing are these microtubule ideas that we have in our brain, which are physical objects in our brain that Dr. Roger Penrose is talking about and anesthesiologists are talking about. It's fantastic. And it's possible that remote viewing,
Mm.
people who have that way of looking into the near future, as we all do, but some of them are better at it than us, could tap into a timeless realm. So time doesn't, the future, the present, and the past doesn't exist. So speaking to Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff about remote viewing, literally yesterday, Ashton, it seems to me that the way that remote viewing works was very much tapping into some type of timeless realm, and that the remote viewers, through an emotional connection in the future, it had to be an emotional connection,
Hmm.
could recall the future in the past. So that's how they made it work. It wasn't looking at an underground secret laboratory in Russia at a distance. It was about seeing through time. That's
Yeah,
what
it's
remote view.
retrocausality, right? Retrocausality. And there's an experiment that actually supports the notion of retrocausality called the delayed choice quantum eraser, where they,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
I looked at that experiment and I saw people trying to debunk it and what have you. And my
Yeah.
interpretation was that it's clearly sending information from the future to the present, which is, time travel. And now to me, it's just a matter of what can you do with that. And I think it's directly, I thought all these concepts that you've been talking about for the last 5 minutes, I think are related. Gunter Nimitz and his
Yeah.
faster than light device. I mean, if you
Yeah.
look at that and the idea of quantum tunneling, it's like it's jumping the gap between these regions
Jumping the
faster than
gap.
the speed of
Yes.
light. And how do you explain that? I think the only way to explain it is the
Mm.
same way that you explain remote viewing, and it's
Yeah.
quantum entanglement, right? It's quantum entanglement that all points in space and time must have some connection.
Everything is entangled, right? And
Exactly,
time doesn't
irrespective of
exist.
distance. So do you think that there's
There's
an
no
ether?
gravity.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So do you think that there is like then like an ether or whatever of like, what has been talked about since the time of Tesla? Is that what is your views on how to rationalize how that could be possible?
I think that's such a great question because I think we as scientists and science investigators, and I think what physics does is look at the observable effects of the universe and name it. And I think the term ether describes was ahead of its time. And
Yeah.
I think that as we discover the near field and far field and subatomic world, is a giant connected universe which is timeless, gravityless, and spaceless. It suddenly is closer to the name ether that we coined in the 19th century. And in fact, although that name was dropped and we started talking about transmission by radio over through our kind of big field space. I think as we discovered quantum physics in the 1920s, that term should come back because I think there is an ether. I think the ether is inside us all. I think it's internal to our atomic structure. And I think as beings or objects, and I don't think humans are unique. I think humans, we have a consciousness because we're conscious of the ether or we're conscious of the quantum state. Now, I think that anything that is far field, which is big stuff, might be aware or could well have a system that is aware of a larger connectivity. Birds, for example, are very high-end quantum brains. They can do calculations of navigation and direction finding and other things. And in mythology, birds are seen as this higher life form than humans because they possibly have a way of being much more connected to our connected quantum ether.
Wow, interesting.
It's just my opinion, but
No, I mean, I
not.
think that's
It's not my opinion. The people are doing the research.
yeah, and to me, if there is an ether and maybe like energy is coming from this and all points in space and time are really connected, then to me it really does broach the idea of, well, where's consciousness coming from? Is it coming from this
Right.
ether? Is there a direct connection that we have to it?
Yes.
And this is why I think the people that throw out Hal
Yes.
Puthoff's research in the 70s because they go, oh, remote viewing's psychic, blah blah blah. Like I think that's a little bit naive to do that because the basis for that
Yeah.
is that we think we understand everything there is, but we have all these experiments like the Gunter-Nimitz experiment that seem to counteract or contradict our understanding. And I looked into Gunter-Nimitz, and in 2005, I think he was supposed to do some type of demonstration, and he just never showed up. And it wasn't until I think 2019 that I don't know if they were students, recreated the experiment. And people have tested it. And some people say, well, the distance is so short that it would basically be instantaneous. But we have detectors that can detect even, short distances like that, even at the speed of light. And they tested it, and it was way too fast to be explained away as some sort of anomaly in the measurement apparatus. So what I think recently you did some kind of deep dive as well. Did you come to a similar conclusion that that was actually his experiments? It was legit.
Yeah, I did, and I know somebody who was at the conference where Gunter Nimitz turned up. He didn't want to go on stage that day, and he actually sent postgraduate students. He desperately wanted to communicate with European radio telescope people, and the story that he didn't turn up is not true.
Oh,
And
wow.
that is just literally not true. People did meet him that day, but he either it's badly reported or he didn't go on stage or there's some confusion over that, and it was very much used against him.
Yep.
And it supposedly the bloke I know knows Gunter quite well, and he was there. He just wasn't very public, supposedly, or I don't know really what happened. And
Huh.
true, the postgraduate students at Cologne did demonstrate it, and the one thing that Gunter Nimitz really peed off the science community by saying faster than the speed of light, FTL.
Yeah.
And that really pissed people off because so much science is anchored on Einsteinian physics that the speed of light is a barrier. and he was really wrong in saying that. And what he should have said, and what I'm going to say now is mind-boggling,
Oh, let me
is
put you full
it?
screen.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. Okay. So faster than the speed of light isn't possible in a framework of relativity. Of relativity. I mean, you can actually possibly go faster than you can appear to be going faster than the speed of light in a relative sense. No, I'm talking shite. Let me say it a different way. What Gunter Nimitz did with his quantum communication, and that word is also misused, is he found that it wasn't faster than the speed of light. It's instantaneous. There is no speed. That's what he should have said. That's what my contact said. As soon as he said FTL, he got laughed at because it still implies a speed. But in fact, what he found was it enters and exits simultaneously. He described it, like I said, like pushing on the end of a rod. Or I used a demonstration, which obviously isn't the same, but it's a good demonstration of those Newton's balls, where you pull one out and it hits, and the one at the end flies out and goes like that. Now, there is a shock wave of gravity on Earth making that happen, and it's just very fast and we don't see it. But it's a good analogy to what Gunter actually is demonstrating. You put the signal in, and it comes out the other end at the same time. There isn't a wiggly bit in the middle.
Quantum entanglement. That's the only explanation I can come up with for that.
Connectivity, entanglement. Yeah, quantum entanglement, two good words. But science and physics is continually redefining how we describe what we're observing. And as you said, the what Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff were doing through with SRI and remote viewing was an application of quantum entanglement. But at the time, they were doing it as an application for the CIA. I mean, because it was a way of exploiting a looking into the future, never looking remotely, but remotely into the future. And so at the time, was that fully understood of how it really worked? I don't think it was. I think, Puthoff's pretty smart, so is Tarek, but I think only now are we understanding the quantum mechanics of the near field that they exploited. And I think that's what everybody who's ever had an anesthetic is being demonstrated. Anesthesiology is a way of dampening consciousness. And the way that anesthetics work are really strange. And there's a link between how our brain works under anesthesia and what structures in our brain might be in touch with the near field quantum world. Now, when we unpick that mystery, and it's going on right now, we've unlocked a way of instant communication, time travel, traveling faster than we want, instantaneously maybe, and incredible distance communication. And I think in 2024, we are living in an interesting time. We definitely have confirmation of ET. Although SETI and Brits Who Listen and other groups are shy of saying it because they don't want to be ridiculed. That's what I hear. And I think that we're also, there's large investments right now into ether, quantum communication, and time manipulation.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I want to kind of change gears a little bit, but that was an awesome discussion. And I was really happy
I really
to hear.
enjoyed it. Yeah.
I'm happy to hear the thing about Gunter Nimitz because I just read Wikipedia that said that he didn't show up, and that goes to show you probably shouldn't believe Wikipedia.
Sure.
But one last question on that front, but then I want to talk about one last topic.
Okay.
Why do you think he hasn't been more outspoken? I mean, it's 2024. Like, that's such a breakthrough thing. And I think it was like 2005. It was almost 20 years ago that he
Yeah,
was.
yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I've reached out to him and his family, and he's late 80s, early 90s. He
Yeah.
doesn't want to talk about it. I think Oh, if you go to Cologne and you go to his physics department, there's people there who will talk about it
Wow.
in German. Feel free to go and talk to them. There is in that university, in the hallway, is the Gunter Nimitz original kit.
Really?
They're very proud of it. This is,
Wow.
we are still heathens. We still ignore people who talk French or German.
Yeah.
I mean, get a life, people. Use Google Translate. I mean, honestly, I mean, so much science has been limited over the years by language, and I think that there's quite a good reason that I can't actually tell you about what the outcome of putting the Nimitz receivers on the telescopes. And I think that is also connected um, with SETI and Brett Listen not wanting to um, spill the beans quite yet. Although I think we're in a stage politically where humans are ready. I think
Mhm.
with these drones, I think if it's ET, if we definitely confirm UAP are real, we know UAP are real all
Mhm.
over the world. I think we are now smart enough not to be War of the Worlds panicked, and
Yeah.
I think we should start hearing these things, and I think people should be open to the idea. Uh,
Well, so
why?
let me ask you
Yeah.
this. What is your favorite non-human intelligence hypothesis? So presumably you're familiar with all different options. I'll throw a few out there. Some people said stuff like future humans, demons, angels. Of course,
Mm.
extraterrestrials is an option. Ultra terrestrials. There's a lot of different options out there. AI, things like that. What is your favorite theory?
Um, well, I got quite a few, really. I mean, I think I'm open to all of them. I'm not particularly closed. I mean, I start thinking that even, as you say, demons and angels and things might be a way of interpreting things that people, to put them in more human terms.
Hmm.
Um, I think there's life in our universe. It's so unlikely that there isn't salient life out there or biological life of some type or very different life. Um, I think that it is um, quite unlikely that living extraterrestrials necessarily need to visit planet Earth in our atmosphere. I think it's quite likely, more likely, that they would send, if they're interested in us, and I think we might be vaguely interesting, that they would send a mechanical probe that would circle the sun for power, communicate between stars to make a network, or be on the rings of Saturn or the moon. Or maybe a couple of objects have been put in the ocean. Why not drop a couple in the Pacific? But they're not flying around. But what are UAP? I mean,
Mm.
UAP are real. There's countries, I'm always shouting this, the Britain officially said UAP are real in 2000 with the Condon report, and France and Brazil have said the same. It's only the US are still debating it. Get a life. Um, um, Although, on the other hand, it's the US who came up with the six observables. Five observables and the sixth of human injury, which is interesting.
Ah.
And those observables were coined by US defense contractors.
Hmm.
So they know UAP are real.
Yeah.
It's just that it's not quite reached Washington yet and the public.
Interesting.
In Britain, everybody knows UAP are real. I mean, in France, you can go, I can literally tell my local police officer, and he would file a report with the French government that would go on a database. And
Wow.
they're not going, "You're mad. You saw something crazy." They would just say, "Yeah, where do you see it?"
Wow.
And they would assess it, and they would look at other sightings. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, there's things in the sky, there's things visiting us. I think it's unlikely to be living creatures. I think it's more likely to be either multi-dimensional things that can go very fast. I think, I think. Oh, do you know the whole blue shift
I learned,
incident?
yeah, Hal Puthoff mentioned that in a video I was watching, that the way, I
Yes.
think it's like the way they're manipulating like space time causes a blue shift effect, which can push
Yeah.
the electromagnetic waves into the visible frequency range, or it can push it to the ultraviolet where it might give you burns. Is that what you're
Or,
getting at?
or higher into
Or higher?
even more dangerous frequencies. Yes, that very talk that he gave, which is very
Yeah.
interesting. It turns out that what he's saying isn't speculative. If you do a warp drive,
Hmm.
the frequencies counterintuitively blue shift when an object is
Wow.
departing, rather than redshift, which you would expect when it was going
Wow.
away. And there's definite
Huh.
evidence of people who have been injured by frequencies that have suddenly gone up. I mean, sunburn is a classic thing. I mean, we saw
Yeah.
that in movies, but movies are often have very good science advisors. And the some of the injuries at Rendlesham Forest were from high frequencies, and those high
Really?
frequencies could have easily been produced by something departing and going out of the visible spectrum into the UV or even beyond that to the point where they become, ionizing frequencies. And
Well, so
yeah,
yes, that takes me to the last kind of topic that I wanted to talk to you about, which is more people related to Hal Puthoff. I don't know how everybody out there is related to him, but he also worked with a guy at SRI named Ken Shoulders.
oh
And
yeah,
in the late 80s, Ken Shoulders discovered exotic vacuum objects, which he said were balls of plasma that were
yeah.
self-organizing into a sphere and self-sustaining. And he called them exotic vacuum objects because he thought they were cohering energy directly from the vacuum. And then another guy named
Yeah,
Eric W. Davis, who is
yeah.
actually Hal Puthoff's number two guy, chief science officer at Earth Tech right now, wrote a paper in 2004 called Ball Lightning Study, which was something I had never understood. But when you read it, you
Yeah,
realize he's talking about
yeah.
balls of plasma and ways you can
Plasma.
use them to extract energy. Now, I look at this whole drone situation that we were talking about at the beginning of the interview, and I
Yes.
kind of wonder, like, are we using the word drone in
Mm.
to be kind of a little bit misleading? Because
Hmm.
now if I piece things together, I go, well, we've got this guy, Ken Shoulders, who said we can make these balls of plasma. You've got Eric Davis going and explaining how we can stabilize them, use them for energy. And then you've got Hal Puthoff, who has a communication patent that is like a gravity communication patent device that can
Yeah.
go through plasma. It says right in the abstract, goes through plasma. And I go, huh, could we make a plasma drone that we could just float around out there? What are your thoughts on that? And then the other question is, do
Great.
you think plasma, if it is like this thing that can float freely and doesn't break apart, do you think something like that could be conscious? Could it be a life form? Go ahead.
Yes. Plasma is conscious. Um, Plasma, the fourth state of matter, is the most common state of matter in our universe. Um, the results of many UAP studies, and I think Avi Loeb and the Condon report certainly will, the Condon report confirmed it, and I think eventually Avi will have
Mm.
observatories that will observe plasma because
Wow.
that's what people see. But what is plasma? And is plasma a conscious being? Well, I heard that plasma has will do. A lot of people who've come across ball lightning, which is a natural form of plasma that is formed by high energy electrostatic forces here on Earth, have found that if you approach a natural form, a ball lightning, it will take evasive action. Now, the evasive action protocol is a form of higher consciousness.
Wow.
So, um, does plasma have a way of tapping into the quantum world where everything is connected? It seems that it could be. I can't think that we as humans are the only conscious beings. I think plasma itself seems to demonstrate in the way that we see it moving and taking, you go up, pilots have come to I've approached plasma things, and they seem to move away,
Hmm.
not through gravity or wave or wind or anything, but I mean actually it seems to take evasive action. Um, the interesting thing about plasma, which really fascinates me, is what is plasma and how does plasma stay in an ionized state in our atmosphere? And the I think the most interesting thing about plasma, and here's my plasma demonstration, is the center of a ball of plasma is just deionized normal, say, atmosphere in our atmosphere, and it's desperate to rejoin and not be ionized and get
Yeah.
back into its stable form. But there's so much energy in the ball of plasma that when it changes back near the edges, the periphery of the energy field, it has to throw away the energy in the electrons to rejoin the protons, and that is light. So plasma has this luminosity around its circumference of a sphere, and that light, of course, can be manipulated by the different types of plasma you can make. So you can make different things a different color, and I think plasma is very studied and very interesting. I, I think it the other thing about plasma is that imagine a laser pointer. You can direct a plasma weapon there and there. And so some of the effects that we've seen from UAPs that seem to do fast or
Mhm.
very fast maneuvering could be, in fact, a plasma effect. Um,
Absolutely. The
I,
bubble explanation you just gave there is almost exactly what Ken Shoulders would describe as a permittivity transition, where you're making a bubble
yeah,
in space-time, and that's why they don't escape. That's why it stays coherent. And it
right.
actually, it will give off light as well, exactly, but it may not look exactly like a light bulb because of it may
No,
like I think that there was
it could
in
be
the UFO hearing.
black. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the UFO hearing where they mentioned too that some people were noticing these balls of energy had almost like a dull light to them, like a roiling of the sun, I think was how it was
Oh,
described.
yeah, that's right.
It
That's
kind of
right.
made me think about that, where it's like
Yeah.
maybe it's a luminous thing, but not exactly luminous like we would see with like a light bulb. And it was Jack
Right.
Machampkin, 1992 paper, force-free time
Um,
harmonic plasmoids as well, that said that you can manipulate the Poynting vector. And what this will do is basically keep it self-contained so that there isn't energy radiating outward, which I just thought was amazing because between
ah.
Eric Davis and Jack Machampkin, these papers are Air Force Research Lab papers. This isn't like,
Hmm.
random scientists that are out there. So the government was taking it seriously. And the last thing I'll say on it before I get your
Oh no.
feedback is that I was reading this book by Lynn McTaggart, and she mentions Ken Shoulders and Hal Puthoff working on these balls of plasma. And she
Oh.
says that the government actually gave it one of the highest priorities for research. One year, it was like the third highest
Yeah,
priority next to like B 2 bombers and things like that. And then
that's
the
what I
next year,
hear.
they upgraded it to the
Yeah.
second highest priority of all the research things, which was essentially trying to figure out how these balls of plasma worked and if we could extract energy from them. Pretty incredible.
And that's precisely what the physics community through the Defense Department in Europe have been doing ever since the
Hmm.
MOD content report actually um, recognized that plasma ionized effects could be the source of UAP. The
Wow.
report goes on to say we need to open up vast areas of research into utilizing plasma effects. The other amazing thing about plasma is because you've stripped apart normal atoms and you've now got
Yep.
a negatively charged and a positively charged piece of this subatomic particle which is stripped apart, it's magnetic. So you can then manipulate it with magnetism, so you can steer it like a cathode, like a beam in a cathode ray TV. You can do lots of things with plasma. You can change its shape. You can draw it. You can draw lines with it. You can send it in volumetric space, and you can also change its color. And certainly we've seen applications of that for countermeasures for aircraft. The
Yep.
concept of the loyal wingman or the ghost plane. So
Hmm.
now you can project a fleet of of aircraft only one is real, and you've got these appear totally solid other aircraft, which could be very good. They also have the heat signature and the radar signature of your real aircraft, so they can be a countermeasure to air to air or surface to air missiles.
Yeah.
And the technology to make that happen was all to do came very much out of the plasma research, and very much you're going to like this, Ashton. There's no way you can do that unless you have an incredible power source
Yeah.
to actually produce and ionize plasma effects, because plasma in our atmosphere, it loses its power very quickly. And
Yep.
so you need to have some very strong condensed power sources. What the power you discover what the power source is for that and how they built it, and you unlock a lot of secrets.
Yeah, that's my favorite question to ask is what is the power source for this UFO flying around in the sky? How is that thing floating freely?
Ask that question. Yeah,
That's the question everybody should be asking out there. That's the one that
that's the
breaks
one.
through all of the misinformation and what have you, because it's such an important question for us to understand how the physics of these things is working out there. And to your
Yeah,
point,
and
one of
it
the
is physics. That's the other thing I'd like to
yes,
say. Sorry, I'm really shouting now.
oh,
Is
you're fine.
so many people say, it breaks the laws of fucking physics. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. These are known physics
Yep.
that are being exploited in interesting ways, and it doesn't break any laws. And as you say, we need a power source. Find the effing power source. How do you condense that much energy into something small enough to be deployable in a pod under an airplane, or as a EM weapon in the field in a container, or on the back of a truck? Yeah, no, look into power sources, folks.
Yeah, and Salvatore Pais actually on the interview he did with
Yeah,
Tim Ventura specifically said you should be
yeah,
thinking in the terms of cold plasmas. And how do we make cold plasma? He goes, femtosecond, attosecond, lasers, and you go and realize, oh, in 2023, the Nobel Prize winner in physics was for attosecond lasers. This is
right,
important because the
right.
faster your pulse of laser, the higher
Mm,
the energy. So you could
mm,
imagine that you could use something like that to
yeah,
strip the electrons off of your molecules
yeah,
and then do what you were talking about is separate it out. And
ionize it.
plasma can achieve energy densities that are far superior
Yeah,
to any
and
wires.
retain them and keep them. They can be a
Mhm.
sort, they can be a battery as well. I mean, so
Yeah, it's
yeah,
basically a floating battery that's going
yeah,
around
it
there,
is.
very highly charged. And this is where, we don't need to dig into this in this conversation, but maybe we can do a follow up sometime. Is that you
Yeah.
start to wonder when you think about these huge charge densities in these plasmas, you go, well, how close are we getting here to like unlimited energy access, right? Like this, what is
Hmm.
that power source? If there is an external input, like the
Sure.
ether, for example, then
Yeah.
that would be far superior to solar
Yeah.
power or wind power because it's
Yeah.
always there,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
No, I completely agree. And I think the other, if you, the biggest, what's the, yeah, good question. What's the biggest department in the Pentagon?
Is it
I'll
the
just tell you, the
DOE?
biggest department in the Pentagon is the people who organize the fuel to go and fight wars. They
Oh
have to
wow.
plan 5 years ahead to put in super tankers and pipelines to put, um, gasoline for Humvees. But imagine if you could have a power source deployable in a foreign country that you're fighting a war that doesn't use fossil fuel. And that's amazingly being developed right now. Is the wireless transmission of power, and it's not what you think. It's much more exotic, and it needs to be secure. It can't be hacked. It can't be switched off. And there's an awful lot of research into that.
Wow. Yeah, and I think people should also wonder why is it that the Department of Energy in the United States is the top
Ah,
dog when it comes to the UFO phenomenon?
number
That's
one.
pretty odd, right?
Yeah,
Because it all
yeah,
comes back to what you
yeah,
said,
yeah,
the energy. To me, that's the real crown jewel of the UFO phenomenon. Although aliens is of course intriguing, but the energy source, exotic energy source would
right.
change everything on this planet.
Oh
So
well.
Professor
Thank
Simon,
you.
this has been an awesome conversation. Go
It has
ahead
been
and tell
good.
people where they can find you.
Oh, just on YouTube, just type my name in, Simon Holland, Professor Simon, whatever you want to call me. Um, and I continue. I have a whole bunch of new subscribers, up to 136,000, because they all hate me, which is great because you're watching my videos. No, 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 I love it. I'm really enjoying it. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I really enjoyed talking to you, Ashton, anyway, about things. We're on various same groups, and I know you and I keep up with what's going on. So good. That was a very good conversation today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you and have a great day, guys. Follow Professor Simon Holland on YouTube. I'll put a link in the description.
Thank you.
Appreciate you guys. Have a great day.